Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could make it, and happy there are more people this time. We are doing the Climate Change by the Elements, which is a podcast we've been doing talking about climate change. But what we wanted to do was to break climate change into smaller pieces. So my co-contributor is Carol Bluestein, who is somewhere out there. Carol, say hi.
Somewhere here, yes.
There she is. So Carol is here. So we're talking about breaking climate change into smaller pieces. The ancient alchemists thought the universe was only made of 4 elements: air, earth, fire, and water. And with those 4 elements, they planned to try to change the world. They wanted to alter metal. They wanted to create the Philosopher's Stone that would allow them to turn gold into lead and give themselves immortality. And these are all great ideas, but none of them came true. But they did eventually give us chemistry and a bunch of things that we could use. So when I was looking at climate change and wondering why people have a hard time with it, the thing I came up with is it's huge. It's monstrous. It's so big when you try to encompass it in your mind, you usually get a 404 default error that says, hey, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. This is just too much for me to do. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go play a video game, and I'm going to tune out whatever you're talking about because it's just not that serious. And I can relate to that. Because the more of this I do, the more research I do, and I've always done this research already, but the more I do, the more horrifying it becomes and the more overwhelming it is. So we decided to break it down into 4 elements: the air, the earth, the fire, and the water. So last week we talked about water, because basically without water there would be no life on earth. We talked about how water relates to the human condition and how climate change is affecting water, and how we use water is affecting ultimately how we will live on or not live on Earth. And what we came across in that study was that, wow, water is literally everything. It is everywhere, and without it, no life on Earth would take place. No manufacturing could happen. No farming could happen. Basically, without water, we're done. And that's a revelation. So we talked about that, and I've got some notes that I'll share with you at some later date. Today we're going to talk about air. Now, water was terrifying because, like I said, you literally, if you were to imagine yourself in a supermarket and you walked around that supermarket, there's nothing in that market that exists without the use of water. I mean, not the food, not the products, not the packaging. Literally, if I were to subtract the water from everything in the supermarket, there'd be nothing there. Literally nothing. Because everything we produce with water. A human being is made of 60% of water. So we pretty much need it to live. Without it, we can only live about 3 days, maybe 5 days if you're really hardy. But without air, you know how long you're going to last? You're going to last about 7 minutes without some technology there to save you. So as desperately as we need water to live, air is that much more important. You literally need air to live. Without it, you are done. 7 minutes from now, someone's declaring you brain dead, and we're going to move on. Air is absolutely essential for life, and it is the second most important thing that ever came into existence once life started existing on this planet. It's been here pretty much since the beginning, and it wasn't something we could breathe when the Earth first came into existence. If you were to go back to the Devonian era, way back then, you'd find that air was not for us. And in fact, nobody used it. It was just kind of there. It was an outgassing from volcanoes and other places, and it was hot and sulfuric and gross and totally unusable. But there were things that could use it, and eventually those things turned into bacteria that would eventually convert those sulfuric gases into a deadly poison called oxygen. And after they did that, they all died off, and soon only things that were left were things that could use oxygen. So while I feel bad for them, I'm grateful because we need oxygen to live. So now we have plants and animals that convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. That's what plants do. And then we convert oxygen back to carbon dioxide, keeping plants happy. So as long as there are plants, there will be people. And that is one of the challenges of us being humans, is that we forget that we're related to nature and that we need it to survive. So today we're going to talk about air. What do you need to know about air to live? Well, you don't actually need to know anything about it because it's always around us. It's invisible. It takes care of us. It protects us. Air protects us from the sun. Without the atmosphere, without our invisible protective barrier, the Earth would have no life because air protects us from radiation. It buffers the sun's energy and spreads it out so that rather than just baking the planet dry, it buffers it and moves it around and allows us to exist. So air is mission critical in keeping all animals alive. We take air for granted. We don't see it. We know we need it, but you never really think about air unless you're holding your breath or you're underwater. So what kinds of conditions take place through climate change that make air our enemy? Air has become our enemy now. It used to be our friend, but now with the advent of superstorms and other phenomena from weather, the air is no longer someplace we look to the sky and pray for rain. Now, when we think of hurricanes, we think, my God, how long will it last? And will I survive it? Will my town survive it? Will my city survive it? We no longer look at the sky for rain. Now we look up there with dread. So with that, I'm going to let Carol have some words because I know she's just dying to have something to say. And I'm just going to sit here and be pretty for a minute. Go on, Carol.
Well, with air movement, the hurricanes, and I think there are hurricanes in the Western Hemisphere and cyclones in the Eastern Hemisphere.
No, I think they're called typhoons. They're typhoons where they are in the east. They're typhoons, in the west they're hurricanes.
Okay, and the air can be moving so fast that they destroy cities, and they bring the water in, and they can destroy the earth. And what we have are people dying in the streets, but we also have people migrating. So air has a lot to do with the movement of people around the planet. And we're not talking just a few hundred, we're talking about millions of people. And that's going to be an issue as life progresses. And the air has a lot of particulates, has a lot of things in it that are no good for us. And I'll tell you what my aha moment was today. There's particulate matter that lives in the air. As Thaddeus told me, which I did not know, every time the rubber from a tire hits the road, microscopic pieces of rubber are flung into the air. That means we breathe that in if we're anywhere near cars.
Yum.
Yeah, the ozone, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide are all things that invade our air through manufacturing, through the deforestation, because as Thaddeus said, air cycles. And the thing that I realized today, Thaddeus, how many people die from bad air?
See, now you're gonna make people be bummed out. What if I told you?
No, I'm not gonna bum them out. It's 12,000.
It's gonna bum them out. If you tell me that 7 million people a year die from air pollution, I'm bummed out. We just are. Okay. 7 million people die from air pollution across the globe every year. Conditions related to low air quality, conditions related to pollution, like India, for example. India has some of the worst pollution in the world, second only to China, which has, basically because it does all our manufacturing, it is pretty much the number one polluter on the planet.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. But on a personal level, I don't know if everyone realizes that our lungs expand and contract air, and the cilia inside the lungs purifies that air so that we're not, our bodies get the air that they need to make our brains function, etc. So all of these microscopic pollutants get trapped in the cilia and affect every one of us on a daily basis. And that was, I never thought about our lungs acting as basically a charcoal filter for the air. So if we are going to treat our bodies better and healthier, we're going to have to do something about the air that we breathe. Okay, back to you, Thaddeus.
All right, she had already bummed you out with the bad news that air kills people. But it's not just air. I mean, our air kills people. It does. And it does because we have chosen to treat the air as basically a dumping facility. So let's go back in time for a moment. Do you guys remember the beginning of the industrial age? Can you think of old London? Old London had a nasty, nasty condition. It had coal. And what London did during the early industrial age, and we did it in America too, but it was first seen in London. They burned so much coal because coal was just everywhere. It was free. You just dug it up. It came out of the ground. You could burn it. It was great. And nobody ever considered how much pollution coal generated until one day they looked up in the sky and they noticed that London, which is typically overcast, wasn't just overcast. It was dirty cast. It was polluted. It was black. Everyone, even the well-to-do, could be seen tainted and touched by coal dust and pollution all across the city. And it was only when they realized it was everywhere, it wasn't just guys who were sweeping chimneys that were covered in coal, that someone decided, well, maybe we should start thinking about not burning quite so much coal or putting our coal-producing facilities outside of town, away from where people live. Coal was easy to use. You could dig it out of the ground. It burned right away, and it pretty much began the Industrial Revolution. But as we started using...
Thaddeus, let me interrupt for a sec. Actually, the Great Smog of London was in 1952.
Oh, yeah, I was going to get there. That's after World War II. No, but there was pollution even before this, because while the Great Smog... Yep. The Great Smog was a condition, but we realized this was in the 1800s when they realized, wow, we really burned too much coal. It became an idea to them that they were doing too much. But yeah, it was after World War II that pollution went totally crazy, because they basically started doing all kinds of manufacturing after the war ended. Believe it or not, much of Europe, like America after World War II, we started doing a lot of manufacturing because we had all these factories. We used all these factories to make war on people, and these factories made people money and they gave people jobs. So at the end of the war, you know what they didn't do? They didn't close them down. So as a result, there was a new influx of pollution and less savory conditions for a long time. And these conditions persisted because America and Europe were They were trying to maximize the use of these facilities to produce new things, cars in particular. Mitsubishi, for example, was a tank manufacturer before it was a car manufacturer. So a lot of these places that used to produce vehicles of war turned around to produce vehicles of consumption. And all this industry produced an incredible amount of pollution in America and in London from the 1940s, let's say 50s, to about the 70s. So like if you were in New York, for example, during the 70s, all you could see was gray skies. There was never a clear day. Smog was dangerous. We actually had our first smog days then.
Yeah, and black lung.
And I grew up in those. And black lung in places that did not have coal miners. So just to show you, we had black lung in places that did not have coal miners. That's how much pollution there was. It's a fantastic amount of air pollution in these periods. And when the EPA started looking at this and realizing that pollution was becoming untenable, we began to start talking about moving industries overseas. And so a lot of what we'll hear a lot about is America will tell you how we pushed industry out of America because we were concerned about making profits. That was one thing, but the other thing they were doing was they were moving manufacturing out of the country because the pollution quality was so horrific that most of America was suffering from pollution and poison pretty much every day. This was just business as usual. and it was killing people. That's how come it's no longer. No, really, that's why it's no longer in America. Everyone wants to say it's about profit. Part of it is about profit, but the other part was they didn't want any responsibility, because during the 70s they realized that this level of pollution was toxic and dangerous, and it would have longer consequences. So, for example, Exxon conducted a study back then to investigate the effects of CO2 and its effects on climate and greenhouse gases. And what Exxon knew back in the 70s was that this would cause sea level rise, it would cause increased pollution, it would cause increased numbers of deaths, it would cause all kinds of environmental catastrophes. And they knew this in the 70s. And they knew this because they paid scientists to discover it. Now, ironically, Exxon and all the other fossil fuel companies also turned around and hid this information from the general public for years. Now, why do you suppose they did that? Any guesses? Anybody?
Couldn't be money, could it?
Oh, absolutely money. It was absolutely about money. They didn't want people to be trying to hold them accountable. Now, imagine you're a fossil fuel company. You produce billions of tons of pollution every time you get oil out of the ground, every time you get gas out of the ground. Just getting it produces pollution. Moving it produces pollution. Refining it produces pollution. And I don't mean just a little pollution. I mean gigatons of pollution. They didn't want to be held accountable for that. And they absolutely, once they realized that this was a possibility, when someone was willing to do the math, they began to realize that this could have long-term effects. Now, I'm going to tell you how they realized it, and it's going to be really funny to you. Anybody ever been in their car with the windows up, and it's hot outside, the sun's shining, and you notice that your car gets hot, and they tell you not to leave your kids and your pets in the car without a window open? Anybody know how that works? How does that work? Anybody know?
No, the heat builds up.
Yeah, but tell me, does anyone know the physics of it? Why that happens? Anybody? And if you don't know, it's okay. You can just say, I don't know.
I don't know. It's an enclosed space with heat buildup.
Well, there's a physical process. There's a process going on there. So when the sun shines through the glass in your car, that light that comes through your car, part of that light is an invisible light called ultraviolet light. UV light is a high-energy light. It passes right through the window panes, and it hits the stuff in your car. And it gets absorbed by the stuff in your car. So your dashboard, your seats, your steering wheel, all these things absorb this energy. But once they heat up to a certain point, that energy becomes redirected out into the car. Now, the heat the infrared radiation that's leaving all of your dashboards and things, that is a low energy electromagnetic wave. When it hits the windows of your car, what it does is it bounces back into your car because it doesn't have enough energy to penetrate the glass and leave. So it means that your car doesn't just get hot, it keeps getting hotter because when it bounces back into the car, it starts heating up the air because that's all that's left to heat up. So it just keeps heating the car up and keeps heating the car up. And eventually, if left alone, your car can reach temperatures of 125 to 140 degrees, much too hot for pets or children. This condition...
Do the fabrics also degrade? Do the fabrics also degrade?
No, it's not just the degrading. It's the idea that when the energy comes into the car, everything starts to get hot, and when it can no longer absorb energy, it basically redirects it into the car, and it stays trapped in the car.
But it also creates noxious gases.
Well, we don't care about outgassing. That's less of an issue. I mean, if you're sitting in your car with 140 degrees, you're going to die from heat stroke long before you die from outgassing. Just take my word for it.
Okay.
So the thing that kills you is the heat. And when someone started thinking about this, they started looking at the Earth's atmosphere, and they started trying to figure out, well, is there an infinite amount of air around the Earth? And someone said, yeah. And then someone said, no. And someone said, well, I don't know. So somebody went and started trying to figure out how much air there is around the Earth. And when they did this, they realized it was not an infinite amount of air, which meant that it was possible to overheat it. And that's when they began to realize climate change was real. The possibility was real. If the Earth's atmosphere acts pretty much like that ultraviolet light, or those lenses, the lenses on the glass on your car, the light shines into your car, it heats up the air, heats up the ground, and the ground releases the radiation into the air. They discovered that same phenomena happens with air. Sunlight hits the Earth, it bounces back into space, but not 100% of it bounces back into space. And because 100% does not, it means the air heats up. Now, normally this happens to us, and it's a good thing. This is where our weather comes from. The Earth gets heated, wind moves because of this heated air, and this heated air moves around the globe, changing weather patterns and creating what we call weather. This is a good thing. The problem is when too much heat takes place, when too much heating happens, the air starts to do new and unexpected things. And one of those unexpected things was it holds more moisture. So as the heated air holds more moisture, it makes it possible for storms to form. And we already have storms, but these would be new storms. These would be bigger. There'd be more water in the air, more moisture in the air. And these storms would be bigger and stronger and more powerful. And they could produce winds of over 150 to 200 miles an hour. These are winds strong enough to rip pretty much anything that's a building that's not a superstructure, that's, like a reinforced structure like a skyscraper. Anything that's not a skyscraper, a 200-mile-an-hour wind can start to tear it apart. It can tear the roofs off, it can tear the doors off, it can rip the windows out. These kinds of storms used to happen once a century. Now we have them 5 times a decade. And I think we're going to start having them even more soon. And the conditions for these storms took place because greenhouse gases that we now know trap heat, they trap they trap infrared light and keep it from leaving the Earth. That's carbon dioxide, which is one of our biggest ones, methane, nitrous sulfide. These are all kinds of gases that, when left in the atmosphere, they hold and trap heat, causing the Earth to start to heat up. And when the Earth heats up, the ocean heats up. When the ocean heats up, the air heats up. And as you know, we start having bigger and bigger storms. So one of the greatest effects from climate change is the one that affects our air. And that effect is greenhouse gases that heat the atmosphere and cause us to have weather distributions that are different than what we know. Now, what kind of other effects do we have from this? And there are plenty. We can have, and I have a list. I had to get that list because there are so many. I wanted you to know just how many there were. So if you look at air and ask how many kinds of things can take place, this includes greenhouse gases, which increases the atmosphere and ocean temperatures. It causes desertification and erosion. It also causes extreme weather, which increases in intensity and frequency. It also creates rising sea levels due to air temperatures. It creates new forms of pollution, because before, pollution was staying where it came, so if you had a factory, your pollution didn't move too far. But now with new kinds of winds and new increases in speed, this pollution now moves, it travels. You can create pollution in one place and share it with somebody someplace further away. This is now a new problem, a problem we never had before. You can also have new kinds of pollution. So particulate matter from diesel engines, from manufacturing facilities. Believe it or not, does anybody know the second most popular form of pollution that takes place on Earth today? And I was surprised to learn this myself. It is not...
Is it methane?
Well, methane is one... Yeah, well, methane is it's ranked 3 on this list. So the first one is fossil fuels. But can anybody tell me what number 2 is? And methane number 3. What's number 2? Anybody know? It'll shock you. Clothing and textile manufacturing. The technology
Wow.
the technologies it takes to make clothing are the second largest form of air pollution in the world. Then cow farts. Yes, cow farts. Cow farts are number 3. Yes, let's keep it real. Cow farts. That's what they're doing. Cow farting and belching produce methane, and that methane is the number 3 form of air pollution on Earth. But the first 2 are us, and well, actually, cow farts are us too. But that's a different question. I mean, technically, we raise more cows than we need, and as a result, they produce more methane than they should, and that is a problem. So if we ate less cows, if we just gave up cows altogether and didn't eat them at all and didn't have them, we would eliminate, we could prevent a huge portion of climate change taking place in the world today. But you know, and I know no one's giving up their cows, right? But I just wanted you to know that if we became vegetarians, 1/3 of all the greenhouse gases in the world would disappear overnight.
Mm-hmm. And seaweed will also counteract the methane from cows. Feeding cows seaweed.
So, yes.
So
but they're not going to do that either.
You know, we're sort of hitting the half-hour point, so I just wanted to emphasize that last week we found out we have a finite amount of water on this earth. And that is a huge thing to wrap your head around. You know, as we dispose of it and ruin it and let it filter into our rivers and our oceans, we are really going to have problems. And now we're finding out that air is finite. And I think that this is the thing that most people don't really get, that there is not an unlimited amount of resources in the world. They are finite and they have to be managed. So, Thaddeus, do you want to start off some questions and engage?
No. You feel free. Go ahead. Ask some questions. I'm good. I'm listening.
So after you've listened to all this, what do you guys think? Your turn to ask questions and come in.
This is LaDonna, and I have a question. How was it determined that there's a finite amount of air?
So scientists sat down and began calculating air pressure, because what you can determine is, based on air pressure around the world and measuring air density as we go higher into the atmosphere, we can tell you exactly how much air it takes to make the air pressure that sits at sea level. And then we could begin to do calculations using really big numbers to determine that air was not an infinite amount of air, that there was actually a finite amount of air on Earth. Yes, it gets renewed. Yes, it gets altered. Much of our atmosphere is actually nitrogen, which doesn't do anything. Nitrogen is one of those gases that we don't breathe. It gets used for growing things, but we don't do anything with it directly. Nitrogen is fixed in our soil by plants and other animals. So the process for nitrogen manipulation doesn't affect it the way CO2 is affected. So when they were able to sit down and calculate based on air density and sea level pressures how much air there was on Earth, and they now realized it was a finite amount. It was enough that we could destroy it. We could affect it because we were no longer a species that was producing things in the tens of thousands like we were when we were primitive. Once we became industrialized, we started having the capacity to produce things in the millions, and then the tens of millions, and then the hundreds of millions, and now in the billions. We produce things in the billions. For example, there are 1.6 billion automobiles on Earth. Did you know that?
No.
Yes, 1.6 billion of them. We now produce things in the billions. There are 1 billion iPhones on Earth. This means that we now have the capacity to alter the state of our air and our water because our manufacturing is as powerful as a force of nature. And that's why we stopped paying attention, because we never thought we would ever be as potent as a force of nature. But we are now. We now alter our world the way natural forces do, the way storms do. Millions of us live on a coastline. Can you imagine what 7 million people eating and drinking and, pardon my French, shitting does to an ecosystem? That's a natural force. That's like a bomb. And if we're not careful, the things that we're doing are destroying resources that took millions and millions and millions, in case of air, billions of years to come into existence. And we're destroying them in decades. We're polluting them in decades. We're making them uninhabitable for us. See, I want you to understand something, and I always say this at the beginning of everything. Nothing we do will destroy the earth. Nothing. Even if we launched all 10,000 of our nuclear weapons into the air and they came down and destroyed people all over the planet, there would be people that are left. And there'd be earth that was left. The earth would survive. Lots of animals would die, lots of people would die, lots of plants would die, but bacteria would live. And the earth came from bacteria. So at some point in the far, far future, when humans are all extinct, bacteria would make new things that would take over the earth. Maybe cockroaches, they'll take over the earth. They've been around for 300 million years. They're survivors. So maybe the next generation of surviving creatures will be cockroaches. So we aren't destroying the earth. We are destroying ourselves. So the finite amount of resources that are taking place on the earth that we are not shepherding, that we are not stewarding, that we are not managing, will only hurt us if we run out. All right, next question.
This is Carmen. I have a question.
All right.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Yeah, so this is... Okay.
Carmen?
I was just wondering, if in your research, if they offered solutions or strategies, because, without even knowing this until today, I was sensing it. I was like, what if I'm running out of oxygen? Like, what if there's no oxygen in the air? For some reason, that thought came to mind like about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Why?
So, yeah, I just, I have no idea why, but it just came to mind, and it was like, what if there's no oxygen in the air and I don't know? I'm just in bed one night.
Now you're laughing. You're laughing, but I want to say something to you. So, have you ever heard of a dead zone? In nature, around our tributaries are places where water comes off of rivers into the ocean, where men have manufacturing upriver and they dump their toxic waste into the ocean. Or into the river, and then that flows down to the ocean. And what that does is it creates something called a dead zone. These pollutants are so dangerous, all the fish and plants, the oxygen is drained out of the water, and no animals can live there. So you'll find, matter of fact, you'll see a lot of pictures. If you go look at pictures of Florida, they have a lot of these. They have lots of dead zones. And matter of fact, they have them so regularly, they actually have a local warning about them. So
they have a green,
you can find
there's a green zone right now.
Yes, you have notations that tell you can't go there because there's either a cyano bloom or some other toxic bloom going on, or there's a dead zone where there's no oxygen in the water. So this thing that you thought about randomly, what happens if there was no oxygen? That's a real thing for fish now. A fish could be swimming along and suddenly it can't breathe because all the oxygen in an area has been depleted. And if it doesn't turn around immediately, it dies. So this is a real thing, and while it might not happen to us right away, it is possible to make polluted areas so dangerous that living there is basically signing a death warrant. You might not be able to leave, or you might decide that it's best if you do leave, understanding that you have anything where you're going, but where you're living is so toxic you can't stay there. And that is a real thing. That's been happening right now.
And when the fish die, that means a huge percent of the world's population will have no income or food.
That's right. So that's another thing to really pay attention to. Next question.
Yeah, this is Lisa. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that the way I'm seeing it happen is not that we would run out of air all over the world immediately. It's that we would get these concentrated pockets of places where the air is unbreathable, and people would then migrate away from those if they're lucky enough to be able to do so. And the Pentagon has actually warned about this, that the greatest potential for war in the future is because of displaced people through climate change and the lack of resources as they have to move to find livable places to actually live. So, they're in a place where they can't survive anymore. They move out of there. Resources are scarce. They've already left everything they had behind. They start fighting. So it's that the air will I see it now, and I hadn't seen it before this call. So I thank you for that, and I hate you for it, because now I can envision the way it would happen. But I think you're right. There'll be these pockets of dead zones of air the way they are water. I mean, it's happening in the Great Barrier Reef, too, the dead zones. It's horrifying to look at it.
Yes, as water temperatures increase, the coral are dying. They literally can't. They're baking in their juices. They cannot live in these places.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to be the combination of the pollutants in the air plus the temperature rising. I mean, it's really horrifying to think about. On the good, I want to end with a good point, though. So I live in California. I'm just outside of L.A., and I remember traveling to L.A. 15 or 20 years ago, and you couldn't see the mountains. You literally, I remember going out there and people pointing, and they're like, there are mountains back there behind that smog. I'm like, no, there are no mountains there. That's just there's nothing there. And you literally couldn't see the mountains. And then when I came out a few years ago, you could see the mountains. They're bright and clear. So Los Angeles was able to clean up the air enough so that it made a real, tangible, visible difference every day. Now it's starting to get a little smoggy again. There's a lot of wildfires, so it's not as good as it was, but it's still better than it was. So there is the ability to clean up the air. Now, I don't know exactly what happens to the pollutants when you clean it up, but it is possible. So I just wanted to leave with that note.
Well,
it's possible.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll just wait.
There are cities that are planting greenery on their cement posts that hold up their highways. And that is also helping to clean the air. Because the grasses take the CO2 and they put out oxygen. And it's helping. I think Mexico does that. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. And covering rooftops with green helps also. That's right. I forgot about that.
Maya, did you want to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. Who's talking?
Carmen.
Go ahead, Carmen.
I had I guess another part to my question was, during your research, did they offer solutions or strategies to turning this around?
We used to have an EPA. We used to have a government that was interested in protecting us from ourselves. We used to have a government whose goal was to figure out how to reduce pollution. So, for example, Los Angeles and New York, two cities that were so polluted in the 70s and 80s that they actually had days called smog days where they told you, don't go outside. What the hell? Don't go outside? I got to go outside. I got to go to school or I got to go to work. They would tell you, don't go outside unless you had to. That's how bad the air quality was. So one of the things they did was they started changing the laws about emissions. Cars had to get catalytic converters. Catalytic converters burned hotter, they burned cleaner, and thus there was less impurities being produced by car engines. And this meant cars got better. This means cars got cleaner. Yeah, they're still polluting, but they're not polluting the way they were 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It's a much better set of conditions. And as we continue to evolve our car technology, the improvements have shown up in our environment. Now, the problem we have is our government, which used to be EPA friendly, is now absolutely going to resist the idea that climate change is real. Matter of fact, there are several places in the nation, states in the South, for example, that deny the very existence of climate change. They literally say it doesn't exist. They won't put it in their documents. They won't put it in their memos. If you go to the government, the U.S. websites for our U.S. government, the word climate change has been redacted. It is not used because they don't want to acknowledge it exists. Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? So as a result, with the EPA being defanged, even though it doesn't want to be, it has been defanged. We have been told that there is no solution to climate change, and Donald Trump has so much as said that since we know climate change isn't real, because they've decided it isn't, we're going to just do whatever we want, wherever we want. We're going to reduce regulations, which are onerous to car manufacturers, because it requires them to pay to have better technologies so that we don't have to live in pollution. We have the technology. We have the capability to make cities cleaner and greener. We can plant, we can grow, we can change, we can filter, we can force companies to clean their energy off-cast. So like it used to be that factories that would burn, they'd do burn-offs of gas from refineries. Refineries used to have these giant clouds of burning gas going on above them all the time. And these things were incredible pollutants. So they were told that if they wanted to do that, they had to make it cleaner. They had to burn it hotter. They had to find a way to make it so there was less pollution. These things are possible. They are doable, but it requires that the government place requirements on this. And our government right now is not doing that. If anything, everything that Obama put into place, as far as the environment's concerned, they have gotten rid of. And that hurts us. And so we're struggling now.
Right.
Go ahead,
so this is Lisa. No, I completely agree with everything you said, Thaddeus. But I want to make the point even stronger that if everyone in power decided today that we wanted to switch our dependency off of fossil fuels into clean energy, clean up everything, make a pact to do better, we could do it. We have the technology, we have the infrastructure, we have everything in place. It's doing what's called predatory delay. Predatory delay means they are putting off making that switchover as long as possible so that they can get as much money as they can out of fossil fuels before they have to do it. They know that eventually they're going to have to do it or we will all die. They know that. But they want to delay that as long as humanly possible so that they can get the literally trillions of dollars out of the fossil fuels, some of which are still underground, some of which are just like underground and only have potential value while they're still underground. So switching the mindset, like that's really what it will take. It's not like we don't know how to fix it. We know how to fix it. We just have to get rid of the abusers in power who won't let us fix it.
I agree. I love that. It's unfortunate that nobody knows this. I just found this out. I suspected it, but I'm just now hearing about it. And I voted on Monday. You know what I mean? Nothing about the environment was on the ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to change. Thank you for pointing that out. But that's why we have these calls. That's why we give people the knowledge and the language and the arguments and the ways to talk about this. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the word out there in a big way by, writing articles that go to the 3 million people a month that visit our site, and we're trying to get the change the little way through people who come to these calls, understand what's going on, become activists, get other people involved, and start a groundswell that way. So we've got to do it. I mean, there's research that says that if just 3.5% of the population mobilize around an issue, they can cause change. We don't need half of the population to get behind it.
That's right.
We need 3.5% of people who really care about it. So that's our goal.
I love that.
This
point.
is LaDonna.
All right, so, go ahead, LaDonna.
I think you guys have, I think this conversation has been very, very interesting and enlightening.
Oh, girl, I haven't even touched the surface. What we talked about was just that's the easy to reach fruit that we could talk about in 40 minutes that would, get you interested and reveal some secrets. There's horrors out there beyond your imagination, and we don't even want to talk about them. That's how bad it is. There are things that are happening all the time. What we talked about was the easy-to-reach fruit that we could make a change in. We can eat less meat. We can make sure our cars stay tuned up. We can make sure that we have a newer car where possible. Hey, we can learn to not drive our cars. We could ride bikes, ride scooters, we ride electric vehicles. We could walk. These are all things we as individuals can do to make our air quality better. But the thing that we must do more than anything else, even though we as individuals might be doing all these things, we must get our governments and our corporations to change how they do business. Because as long as their business is driving how we live, they will do what they think they can get away with until we make them do something different. And we know that this happens. We know that we can make them do different because the EPA made cars cleaner. They made them run better. And New York has never been so clean. Los Angeles sky had never been so clean, at least until the fires recently. So we know it's possible. Change is real. Change can happen, but we have to mobilize people to do it. We can't let them go to the polls and say, with all the topics that they're talking about, not one of these candidates mentioned the environment. That's like saying, well, I have a great career, but I don't have any place to live, and I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to walk the streets all day. No, you can't. You've got to sleep somewhere. You've got to eat somewhere. And when you don't talk about the environment, that's like saying, I don't plan to sleep or eat. Our environment is all around us, literally, or live. It's all around us. We must take better care of it. And air is real. When you don't have air, you don't have anything. I mean, literally. In 7 minutes, you are dead. So let's keep it real. Let's work on that.
I just want to put in a plug for two quick actions. One is that I haven't owned a car for 5 years now. I literally get as many places as I can on a bicycle or walking, and then take public transportation if I absolutely have to. And it's been great. It's been liberating. It makes me so happy. I get exercise all the time. I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life. So it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like a gain to not have a car. And the second thing I want to say is run for office. If you're worried because the things aren't on the ballot, get on the ballot yourself and start talking about those things. We have people in the Good Men Project who have, because we've been talking about these issues, are now running for office, and they think they have a good chance that they can win because they've learned how to build platforms, talk about issues, and create social change. So get rid of your car, run for office, and I will love you forever. or just keep coming to these calls and learning other things. But
all right, we got less than 8 minutes. Are there any final questions before we close? Any ideas, any things you want to put forth, any visions you see for the future other than having us not having any food, water, air, or stuff to drink or eat? Good stuff.
Well, this is Carol. While I agree with Lisa about pockets, that there will be pockets of dead airspace, it's not going to be for long because the winds are going to move it around, just like they move around the stuff from volcanoes, just as the sun and winds are moving the fires around California, but they're starting to affect climate other places too, air other places too. And we just lost an island in Hawaii, and in the Seychelles, I think. It's the Seychelles. And then we basically lost the Virgin Islands. We almost lost Puerto Rico, and it's not clear what happens if another massive hurricane hits there, whether that island can survive for a while. So the wind, the air, everything, including migration, is affected by everything we do. It is like the butterfly effect, really. If it goes wrong in one place, it's going to magnify across the world. So when Thaddeus said, we moved our manufacturing out of the country to save lives here, not really. It still hits the air, and we still breathe it because the air is not stagnant. And because it's finite and we know it blows, we'll eventually get it anyway. So we have to push. We have to get it said that without taking care of our resources, there will be no civilization to enjoy our products.
And I want to let you know that the cockroaches have already spoken to me, and they are hopeful that we will annihilate ourselves. They come to us regularly and say, look, you guys are doing a bang-up job. You're screwing up the air, you're screwing up the water, and we are hopeful that when you become extinct, and probably in the next 100 years, we're going to take better care of the earth than you ever did. And we're going to miss all the great food you guys had, because that's really all you're good for is your food. But, we're going to miss you guys. That's really where they are. They are completely understanding that we aren't doing the job, and they figure they're going to do better than we did. They outlasted the dinosaurs. Remember the dinosaurs? Cockroaches were around back then. They outlasted the dinosaurs. That's right. And they're still here.
They can feast on the wallboard. Yep.
That's right. They can eat anything. If it's organic, they can eat it. So they're going to eat us eventually. We can do better. I know we can. But we have to start looking at this as a real problem, not just something that we can pretend isn't real because we don't like it. It's not like the monster under the bed. This monster really is under the bed, and he really is going to eat you if you take your eye off him. So we have to do better, and we can. We have the means. We can, like I said, you can eat less meat. You can drive your bike. You can walk to work. You can find a way to get to a job that is closer to you. I mean, right now there are people commuting 2 or 3 hours to get to work. How much pollution are the jobs that we're creating that are miles and miles away from people? How much pollution do we create making those jobs with the understanding that those jobs don't pay enough and people are driving around and they're basically killing themselves to get to and from work? And that just doesn't make any sense. We've got to find a new way of doing business. We really do. Business shouldn't mean the end of our civilization. Yeah, we did business right up until it was the end of our civilization. Boy, it was great. Too bad it didn't last. We can do better than that. I honestly believe that.
How many
I'm going to go ahead.
I just have a question. How many carcinogens do you think someone takes in sitting on the freeway going to work?
If there's a diesel truck there, if there's diesel vehicles out there, they're taking in at least 11 or 12 different carcinogens. I actually have a list of them. There's a whole bunch of heavy metal carcinogens. There's a whole bunch of dioxins. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes off of diesel vehicles that are incredibly toxic, and they're everywhere. So if you're on a freeway, you're sucking in all kinds of crazy toxins. Hello. So we want you to know that it is not impossible to win. It is not impossible to fix this, but it's going to require a concerted effort by everyone. Tell your friends, tell your families, change your lives, save yourselves. Remember, we're not saving the earth. The earth will survive without us. An asteroid hit the earth, killed all the dinosaurs, and the earth was still here. Dinosaurs are gone. But the earth survives. We can't destroy the earth. We can only destroy ourselves. Next week, we're going to talk about the earth and all the horrible things that lurk beneath it that we are taking for granted. Be here. Aloha.
That's going to be great. Yes, please come back. These are always fascinating conversations.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
for coming.